Um,
It sounds like someone is very aggressively typing. I'm not sure.
Oh, I'll stop. Sorry.
That's good. I was about to go mute everybody. Taylor, you mentioned to me that you had looked at this derive RFC. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So, just to refresh everybody's memory, we talked about this in the last backlog meeting on here, and the sort of general consensus was that we wanted something to solve this problem. This problem being the ability to have more accurate derives that take into account what type parameters and what type bounds are actually necessary, but that we didn't particularly everybody's sort of gut reaction was that this RFC wasn't quite the way we wanted to see it happen. And so I though felt sort of uncomfortable with the idea of closing this RFC without actually having read it first. So I went and read it, and I don't know, I found that I liked it more than I expected I would based on the previous discussion. I think my kind of gut check on this RFC was that I saw the syntax initially and was sort of taken aback by it. But after reviewing it, it seems like it has some sort of nice properties in terms of how it interacts with the way that you would spell these bounds, and it's sort of a more flexible and more general option, and I think is a little bit more intuitive than some of the other syntaxes that got proposed in the doc that were using some derive some prop macro specific syntaxes like ignore X type or something like that. With that in mind, the actual proposal in the reference section of the RFC is primarily about extending the types of syntax accepted by derive-based procedural macros. And so I think that that's actually a pretty reasonable starting place, would be to come up with a shape that looks something like this, and decide to start allowing procedural macros to accept it. Whether or not we want to change, for example, clone, copy, debug, and everything to all over to the exact syntax that's being used by this RFC, I'm not quite sure. There are some particular little thorny bits around the exact naming of types and how shadowing works. And I'm not sure exactly what we want to do in those cases. And I'm not sure that I totally agree with the RFC's position, but it does actually have a proposal there, and adding this ability to procedural macros would give us the chance to sort of experiment with this and come up with and see what worked for people in practice. Another thing that was brought up in the discussion that was actually in the unresolved question section of the RFC, but that we didn't see an answer to in the RFC at the time, was the ability to apply these sorts of patterns and shifted bounds to multiple different trait impls. For example, if you only had a certain type parameter inside of a phantom data inside your type, you might imagine that you don't need that type as a bound for any of your impls, copy, clone, debug, or anything, right? And so it would be convenient to have a syntax for that. The RFC proposes, or doesn't propose, but suggests possibly a further extension where we used plus to signify this. I don't love that, and it sort of merits its own discussion. But basically where I landed on this was that I'm more open to this RFC than my initial reading. So
you were saying that I kind of got lost at the end there, but before that, the high level part is that this RFC specifically is really just about extending the set of syntax, or I guess it has two parts. One is extending what the derives can accept, and the other is making a specific proposal for what they should do, or
Yeah, it's both of those, and the specific way that it's extending the syntax does sort of push towards the direction being the syntax being offered by the RFC. But there are some particulars with how I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this. There are some particulars with how this syntax interacts with other language semantics that you could kind of make interesting decisions about that aren't strictly based around the syntax, and those are things that I would think might merit some experimentation, at least on nightly in user written procedural macros.
Okay, I'm reading over your notes and I'm a little. What is is this the presence?
Sorry, I
of,
don't have this doc up. I should, and it looks fuzzy on the Zoom window. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
Oh, okay. One question I had was about the colon here. That says like derive u colon. That's meaningful, right? Just to be clear. That's what makes it like an extra parameter or something.
Sorry, I'm like trying to see. Derive. Yeah, so this section is where I think, oh, you have a colon highlighted right there? I think that's a typo. I think that's not a thing. The one right before clone, is that what you're commenting on?
Yes.
I think that's just a typo.
It should be like this. And I see. And so what is the actual syntax that is being, like, what's being proposed in terms of the extension to derive is that you can put these angle brackets and they get passed as like an extra set of tokens or something to the derive macro?
Right, as well as where clauses. And there's actually a proposed version of this that only adds where clauses, which is kind of odd. But yeah, that's the idea.
Interesting. So, I don't know. I guess I'm feeling a little bit like, I do feel like this is a problem. I'm not convinced this is the syntax that we want, but I guess that's like, it doesn't feel like that syntax is super general purpose. That's what I'm getting at.
So I conceptually, I think it's helpful to think about it as though it has an impl before it, before the angle brackets. Because if you add an impl there, it's literally just like the header that we have with some like elision added. Yeah. If you were to implement the trait manually.
Yeah, which is, I agree, that is kind of nice, actually.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was actually neat, and it made it so that it was sort of intuitive to imagine how you would use it in different ways.
You know, sorry, this is a bit jumping, but you just said if you typed out the impl header yourself and then it just sort of worked, it made me have a little out there idea of like, can we, like, what version of this could be you actually type out the impl header and then we have some way of just it auto derives the internals with presumably some sort of marker.
Yeah, like you could put derive on an impl, for example.
Yes.
The challenge would be that you need the tokens of the type available to you. Which
yes.
You don't have.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you'd need there is you'd need something like, one of like Dietonne's like crazy like let macros talk to each other businesses, right? Where you have
right.
or so that we would have when we evaluated the derive, basically we would have access to, like you said, the the annotation on the original type definition.
Right. I think my sort of meta feeling here is this is all about moving the line between where you just stick a derive on it and where you actually write out the whole thing. And I'm wondering a lot about, like, is extending the proc macro syntax exactly the place we want to do that sort of thing? Do we want to, like, make it easier to not have to write a proc macro to do this for a lot of the cases, and then, you know, if some of the really complicated macros need to have their own attributes to do this, that's okay? Or can we make this more syntaxy and less attribute-y, or I don't know.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point there, which is that already today there's a bunch of proc macros that have needed ways to resolve this problem. For example, the fall off from like having to write serialize or deserialize implementations in Cert versus writing a drive for them is quite significant in terms of difficulty. And so there are already workarounds and crates like that. And if we maybe had a standard way of doing it and ways to give those macros more information, that could be sort of helpful, and having that align with a general purpose syntax that users learn when they learn Rust rather than when they learn such and such procedural macro, I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
And are you implying that this RFC like addresses the problem there in some way?
Say more about what the question is. I mean, I think it does address a problem, but maybe there's an additional problem that you're asking about that it doesn't cover.
I just wasn't clear whether you thought that like Cert could use this to make that cliff between derive and writing serial.
I don't know. That seems like a better ask to David, but I don't want to claim that too early. But it does seem like this is a problem that would be common to many derive macros, and having a common syntax that it answers that sort of problem rather than asking procedural macro authors to all come up with their own, you know, unique way of spelling, like don't include this generic parameter in the derive, would be good, right?
Your impl syntax is kind of just growing on me, I have to say. The idea of saying derive lets you write like a short version of the impl header.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice. I'm not entirely sure about the. Yeah. But to dial back, because I think we got to move on. Like, the question is, I guess, if we were to accept the RFC, that would mean we approve this general direction, and we're going into some experimentation phase or something. Like at most, right? The details we don't necessarily agree with. It feels like it feels like a project to me. This feels like not a small design work, but not a huge project. Maybe one we could carry in parallel and that we could manage if we had people who wanted to, who were into it. But I think it would be a team liaison, like who's really into it. Anyway.
So I think I agree with that. So I guess I would, maybe the feedback here is that we want to ask for a proposal for experimentation with this, like adding this syntax to procedural macros, and that we would be like inclined to accept a proposal like that if there were people who were interested in taking that on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much we can speak for a full like LangTeam consensus, but I think saying I would definitely entertain a project proposal to add, add this syntax and make a group that's gonna like chase this and report back, implement it, try it out, and report back on the experience from it. I do like the version better though, but
You do like what better?
There will be some bike shedding. Like that's part of the experimentation, I guess, is going to be some amount of just bike shedding. I do feel like this is real super annoying. This is like an ergonomics initiative sort of problem where you kind of get used to it, but never, it's always annoying, right? No matter what.
I feel like there's a lot of different levels at which this problem could be attacked, of like how much can you actually handle in here. Because I'm looking also at, we've seen some issues and stuff lately about, oh, we need to support ignoring fields in clones, or a variety of those other things that Saturday also has attributes for.
Yeah.
So there's this like, how deep does this DSL go? Because it could
There's
go
also
extremely complicated, but also when I look at this specific question of like, man, I just didn't want, you know, t colon default because my t is only ever in a vec, so I didn't actually need it. I'm wondering if this is also massively overcomplicated for the 90% case of all I wanted was to derive clone on my thing that has was derive default on my thing that has a hash map.
I don't know. I don't actually know that I agree that that's the 90% case, but maybe that's worth it. Like maybe that's worth gathering data about and seeing like what different, you know, if we made something like this available for experimentation, like and going around and seeing what places can use this and what places isn't it enough for, right? There's also, once you want to get into the sort of full generality of this kind of feature, there's I think an obvious overlap with delegation.
Yep.
That is sort of like unfortunate because we have like sort of a long-standing history of entertaining proposals for delegation that don't go anywhere because there's just too many things people want it to do.
I stand by my statement that I would be open to somebody exploring this, but I want someone who's going to say, yes, I'm ready to commit time and energy to push this forward.
Yeah.
Like a lane
Okay. That sounds like the right call to me. I think I have the same feeling now after having actually reviewed the RFC and thought more about this.
Okay.
Yeah, I +1 for exploring the problem space in some sort of project group makes good sense to me if we can find the right people interested in doing it.
Yeah. I guess the problem is I don't know who that liaison is, but we can try to answer that.
Yeah. It's in that category of there's definitely some sort of a problem here that people hit a lot, but I don't know that we know the solution yet.
All right, let's see.
Also, whoever has a mechanical keyboard, it's coming through very loudly.
Where were we? Let's see. 2811, okay. So -C export executable symbols. Does anybody know what this is? This doesn't seem totally Lang team. Seems kind of more compilery to me, but this is always in that weird gray area.
Doesn't really, yeah, this doesn't seem linked to me.
I think we should just kick this to compiler.
I would add though that like it feels like more generally there's probably some language area for some sort of export like symbol control that we've long wanted.
Yeah, I think this is actually the problem is compiler won't really want ownership of this either.
Right. Yeah, I just don't want us to kick it over and then, you know, compiler comes and says, we don't want it either.
Technically, it's tagged currently as both, but yeah, we need some group. I feel like that group belongs more in compiler than Lang, but that it was like excited to deal with these kind of questions. I guess I don't really care if it's in Lang or compiler, but maybe Josh will have an opinion. I don't know. That said, it all seems fine to me. Not that I know a lot about this. Why don't let's ask compiler want it. I'm trying to think how to do that. Probably be a question. Yeah, probably nominate for discussion in compiler team meeting is the way to go. And I will take that job. That's onerous. What is it? RF, what's the name of it? 2841. Okay. All right. Next one. Super trait item shadowing. This is annoying from time to time, but I don't know. There are some potential complications we want to think about, like how do you call super? They probably talked about that.
Like the fragile base class problem.
Is it? Fragile base class is usually like you kind of created a fake abstraction barrier, but people can break it, or changes to the base class actually break subclasses. Isn't that what you? I forget which direction.
No, I'm just picturing this as if super is an external trait and they add a foo with a default implementation, they broke your sub because sub already had a foo on it.
That seems like actually a good reason to support this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So.
C++ and C# picked, I think, like the opposite choices on these, and both had good reasons about it. So I never know what the right choice for Rust is. Although that was about private and public, wasn't it? Not about actual names.
I also assume that the way you call the super method is by using, some sort of, here it is an example, but not using method syntax, right? You just,
that would actually just, now that I think about it, implementation wise, I think this would kind of just work. Like, in other words, I think we kind of just have to suppress the method resolution from considering the super trait methods, and it would all kind of fall out. So yeah, I think I would be okay with this. Maybe we should just add this. I mean, or at least
I noticed that
consider it for addition. I know I'd want to read it first. But,
it has a surprisingly divided, like it's got like 7 ups, 7 downs. Maybe there's a compelling argument against it on the thread.
Does someone want to review it? And we can.
I can take a look.
I can look at it.
Which one?
We could both do it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
But also, you said an addition, and I don't know why there's an addition needed for this change.
It said something about an addition. Okay, I don't know why either. That's a good.
Because like my understanding of what this says is that currently the code doesn't work, right? And now it's going to make it work. So
right.
It should be strictly backwards compatible.
I'm kind of interested in this as well, because I've been thinking a bunch about like what would it take to allow someone to split a trait without breaking all of its users.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's boats. I don't know how much we care to consider this, but there is a way in which allowing this like is a breaking change to stuff that expected that not to happen. For example, I can imagine like someone having offered like a macro that called a method on a concrete type, right? That users created that was required to, I don't know, derive some trait and then expect that that method resolves to the method added by the trait and the preference here being given to a subtrait method would break that and wind up calling a different method than the macro expected or something like that. But
doesn't it already have to call that through the trait anyway, because otherwise it could get the inherent method?
Yes.
And I think this is like right now, it's taking cases where you know that like the type implements the subtrait, and so currently because it implements both traits which have a method with the same name, it just errors. So it's taking some that currently errors in all cases and makes it work. I don't know that macro. Like it's not. I don't think it's a breaking change for the macro to go from erroring because there are conflicting methods to possibly erroring because you call the new method with a different text.
It would be an expectation breaking change for the author of the macro, right? In that something that they previously could have guaranteed would have been a compiler error would now potentially compile and do not what they wanted.
But I agree with that, but it would be nice to have like one realistic example where that was being used to defend some.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we should require that this gets pushed to an edition, because I think you make a similar argument for a lot of language features, right? That someone could have like had their semantics depend on that language feature not existing, right? But
yeah, I think anything I can come up with could have just been an inherent method or an extension trait that wasn't a subtrait.
All right, let's move on. I think
yeah.
But I'm assigning you two here. All right. Sound reasonable?
Yep.
Okay. And next, 284.
I put a URL link into the generic parameters on derive conversation that might be of interest to anyone who's asking about what I meant about the default thing, but we probably shouldn't talk about it.
Oh, right. I remember. I have not checked with Diane lately about the current status of this work. Maybe that's the right follow-up here, but the idea was that there's work on LLVM that would allow you to have kind of secret values. LLVM understands and detects for whatever reason, read the motivation. I'll probably say the exact wrong details, but for cryptographic reasons. And basically, we wanted to expose, or Diane wanted to expose that feature at the Rust level.
So I will note that Josh postponed or said that RFC bot postponed 14 days ago on this RFC.
Oh, good. Okay. I think that's probably the right call. I was going to recommend it.
It's also, it sounds like not actually supported in LLVM yet, right? So like, it is a bit ahead of.
I would definitely, I think postponing and saying like, if this is still of interest, let's come back and talk about it. Is a good way forward. So, okay. If other people agree, then you should check your box. Where are we here? Also, I'm gonna reopen this where I'm actually logged in to GitHub. 2859. So placement by return.
I think this is.
Go on. I was going to say that didn't we have a proposal about this that we kind of kicked to saying implement in the compiler first and then we'll think about it?
I think there was something.
I don't remember that or not.
I feel like we get proposals that are basically similar to this every once in a while.
I'm quite sure that someone talked about basically a guaranteed copulation, and what we said was, and I think this was the right call, that we should implement an optimization because it's harmless, and then we can decide if we want to guarantee it or not.
The MirrorOp team was definitely working on an RVO and a bunch of these things.
I'm not sure if that's exactly what this is like, what this is proposing.
So I think it's interesting that, like, it specifically proposes, at first glance, it sounds like it's just like solving placement without doing anything, but it still requires that, like, allocating, like, it be a push width or something that will call the closure after it's been allocated.
Right. It is. I mean, it's solving. It is solving it by not doing anything except that. I mean, it is doing something, right? It's adding this guarantee optimization, step one, and then adding APIs that take advantage of that optimization, step two.
Right, but I think that it's like, it wasn't obvious to me at first before, like, looking at the RFC, that it was like the optimization doesn't apply to just push or something.
I see. Yeah. Indeed, it does not. It has to flow upward, kind of up the stack.
Yeah.
I like if all the optimizations are implemented, then we'll consider it. Look at this, I think.
Yeah.
Because the optimizations are good independently.
I agree. I'm trying to think if there's any. No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, never mind. I was trying to think if there was any, like, Lang team side of the thing where in order to do the optimization, you have to assume sort of certain things about, like, that certain kinds of reads are not visible. But I think that's all pretty squarely in the compiler area. I know it's something we definitely talked about around mirror of, like, what kind of, where do we have to introduce temporaries so that we can allow enough freedom that we can be overwriting this value and make sure that it's inserted. Anyway, so I think we can stand by our prior statement of recommendation, implement in compiler first, then consider guaranteeing the optimization and adding library methods, which would be more of a TLS concern.
And I think if the optimizations require Lang guarantees, then we could also consider those Lang guarantees separately from
So if
the larger proposal.
If any Lang considerations come up in the course of implementation, we can address those. We can address them at that time. Okay, and redirect or reference the Lang team proposal. Someone want to do that? That'd be closed.
I'm sorry, I'm joining late here, but this is a topic that I think I have a lot of at least background in from previous stuff with placement in and whatnot. Does that RFC actually talk about the previous work with the arrow operator and whether, like, we need to reconsider re-adding it, or talk about that, or it just sidesteps and says we don't need to have linguistic syntax? It can be just methods.
It's sidestepping. Yes, it's the latter. If I understand it, it's saying if we guarantee return optimization, then you could add methods like new with, which would take this big data structure.
Yeah. Right. If we were to actually go so far as to guarantee optimization, I mean, a big reason why the arrow thing didn't, we took it out is because we weren't guaranteeing the optimization. So it's one of these things where if we're going to do the work to guarantee the optimization here, then it seems like we should at least consider the logic that was employed to remove the placement in operator.
By the way, this is all by the same people, so I guess we don't really have to say, hey, by the way, check out this Lang team proposal that you wrote. I I don't fully follow what you're saying, Felix, actually.
My claim is that we remove the biggest reason that I recall that we removed the arrow operator previously was because we weren't guaranteeing that it actually worked in terms of guaranteeing that it didn't allocate a temporary. And so it wasn't paying for it wasn't paying its weight. And the reason for that was because it was implemented as a macro, sugar. But to implement what they're talking about here, you have to guarantee the optimization at, throughout the compilation pipeline, which to me means if you're going to do the work to actually ensure that, you would presumably be able to also make the arrow operator work right.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer there is just do this thing. If it works, then great. Maybe we'll add arrow later.
Right. That seems like a reasonable. It seems like you could modify this statement to say maybe we would add library methods, or maybe we would consider an operator. Maybe. I mean, honestly, we could have like all our operators are sugar for a trait method, right?
Mm.
That becomes possible now if you have the guaranteed optimization.
Okay.
So I have to take this call real fast. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I think it's sort of there's sort of the compiler side work of providing the optimization, which then we could decide either we think that it should be solved with like closure-based APIs on the data structures, or we will introduce an operator that like the surface level syntax seems like separable from the sort of more compiler side commitment this RFC.
It's true, and they are separable. It's just one of those things where my memory is we spend like ages like arguing over the syntax stuff, and then ended up abandoning the resolution we came to because of the implementation issues. And so even though they are independent, at the same time, it seems like they ended up intertwined in some funny way.
I think
seems like
am I right in understanding that you're saying that if we were to get to the place where we have these optimizations available, that as an alternative to guaranteeing specific behavior of existing functions or new functions, that that would be a signal that it's time to reconsider adding the arrow syntax in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even mind the idea of guaranteeing that certain optimizations take place. My biggest concern is that we'd add a whole bunch of API surface with all these like closure-based operators, when what we should be doing is adding the arrow operator instead.
Can you remind me?
In terms of just,
I'm not actually sure I understand the point of having the closure-based operators at all, really.
I think that's to avoid the arrow operator is why they're using the closure-based operator.
But I don't see why you need either, right? Because we don't guarantee the time that we don't guarantee when. Well, I guess if you're applying this recursively, I'm not familiar with.
You need it. There is an issue where you need it. You basically want to make sure you do the allocation before you do the expression that is going to go into where the thing is allocated. This is discussed in the arrow operator RFC at the very least.
Okay. I should just familiarize myself with that then, because it seems to me like naively, at least in the case of box, unless you're like dealing with recursive boxing, you could just do the allocation first.
No, consider like vec. Consider like placing into a vec is the like go-to example here, where you might have to reallocate the backing store of the vector.
Okay.
The thing I think that's kind of cool about the closure APIs is, in a way, a closure is a C++ initializer list. It just carries the constructor that's going to call along with it too.
Okay, we're moving on. No. But I do feel like we kind of did reach a conclusion here. I agree with you, Scott. I think, if I understand what you're saying, but I do seriously want to move forward.
Yep.
Does someone want to leave a comment? I mean, I think, as I said, this is the same. You kind of already said this once, so it doesn't have to be too long. Okay. And Felix, you're happy with the consideration of, well, let's solve the hard problem that blocked us first, and then we'll consider.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to approach this. I can leave a comment if I go back and listen to the conversation that you all just had in my absence.
Okay, that's either way. I do plan to post the video, but I don't think it has to be too long.
I think Felix's general point of maybe we should also reconsider the syntax if we can actually implement it now is a good one.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
plus one.
yeah.
Okay, access to traits, associated functions, and constants from trait objects. So this is going to allow.
I feel like it's gonna also do work, right? Like every time we have this, someone proposes this, it's
Yeah, what is
or
it?
rather, I'm guessing it's some idea that it turns them into methods or field access or something, which I'm pretty dubious of.
Yeah. I'd be pretty wary of changing the trait object safety rules in non-trivial ways right now, given that we have an like open soundness issue or two we're still trying to fix. But
Yeah. So this does basically proposes making associated constants and functions into methods and fields onto the trait object, so that they can access the V table, like go listen to the V table, and then use that to actually call the function.
yeah, I think out of scope and too complex. So,
I think the workaround here of just make it a method that takes a ref self is like fine for now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Might
mean,
be
so
more.
what that
Go
turns
ahead.
into in practice, right, is that you have both, and then one of them has a where self is sized bound, right, and then a bunch of the implementations for the method just wind up delegating to the definition of the constant, which is somewhat annoying, but fine.
Yeah, but here, do they address like? Because the thing is, like, I mean, it's a non-trivial change around like you have a generic function parameterized by t trait plus question mark sized, and then does t : a function. Like that doesn't actually work any like.
yeah,
Like right now, the way that it works, right, is yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you have to change how you're consuming the constant to look kind of like it's a method or a weird property sort of thing anyway, if you're using this. So my thought here is until we have some sort of way to like pass around a vtable without an instance or something, then we don't want to do this, and people can just use the, well, adding another method is fine for now.
Yeah, maybe. I think the short version is, or I think the real. I don't know what I think about having a way to carry a vtable. Like maybe not, but I think I agree strongly with the workaround is okay. It's not enough. It's not worth the effort to evaluate and fix this at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, plus one is the at this moment part though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
my
the
comment
argument,
was, go ahead, Boats.
Yeah, the argument in favor is like an external crate has a non-object safe trait, and that you can like decide separately, right, without coordinating with the trait definer. But I also think that it's not something we should do right now, and I'm not really sure if we should do it ever. But like,
yeah,
no.
I agree that I don't know that we should necessarily have a way for people to pass around vtables, but that was my attempt at what is the kind of thing that we'd want to to make this more important to have than the like, well, just add a ref self method.
Yeah. Does this sound correct? In particular, I phrased this carefully. I think everyone can agree that traits and in safety are, not how we want them, whether or not this is the exact problem that we would want to fix.
I think my feeling there is more like, as long as the way that you have to use these things requires going through an instance anyway, the method is fine. I don't think I necessarily disagree with what you said.
Okay.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, I disagree with that. I mean, I'm happy to send you code examples and stuff if you want, but I have had cases where it was an extremely annoying situation where I was like, wound up writing a whole bunch of extra code because I needed, in some cases, a trait to be used without an instance and in a way that had a size bound, and in other cases in a way that had an instance and did not have a size bound. And I wound up duplicating the same thing over and over and wound up making like macros to work around and stuff, and would very much have appreciated like a language-based solution to that.
Yeah, that's what I was imagining scenarios like that. That the more
Yeah, seems plausible.
yeah.
I like your summary.
Who wants to write a comment? And move to close, I think. I'll do it. I like writing about trade things. RFC 2886. Okay. Yield safe autocrate. Oh, this sounds familiar. I think we should, if this is what I think it is, then I think we should close this in favor of the work going
Yeah,
on.
this must not await.
What's that, Bugs? I didn't hear you.
It's must not await, but as a autocrate instead of a attribute.
Anyone object to that? Okay. I don't want to do it. We need like a round robin assignment.
I can do it.
Oh, it's structuring assignment. I don't know where we are with this. I felt like we had maybe reached some. We were like, oh, we finished. Not coming. We should merge this. I guess. Okay. I can do that.
There were a bunch of comments that came in afterwards. I don't know if anything there was material enough to cause anyone to change a decision.
I don't either.
Lots of things about, oh, but shouldn't we make this take a real pattern instead of an expression? But I think we talked about that, so probably not.
Yeah, I guess I would say unless there's a new sort of argument that hadn't already been covered, then probably. Then we take, I sort of remember the consensus was we have some simple subset of express part, like it's not any arbitrary pattern or something like that.
It's not even using the pattern grammar, basically.
Okay. But it basically works for the, I'll have to go review, but I feel like the simple cases are the most important.
Yeah.
I'm gonna skip over this one. Actually, I want to close this because I want to rework it, and I like the libs team charter, which was super awesome, and maybe copy and steal some of what they did. So put eco to close. Land to think. Well, it's out of date with what we're actually doing. Unsafe statics. Hey, boats. I'm trying to remember what this was about.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Let me try to remember this again.
It's something around or static.
It must be a replacement for static mute. Like the idea is that it's static mute, but it's more consistent with the rest of the language. So it's The idea is to use an unsafe static which has an unsafe cell in it, and then that's basically the same thing as static mute, except that, you know,
Right. It's very clear. Is there? Okay.
So I remember I wrote this sort of in like an hour, thinking that it was just the perfect solution to static mutes, and I don't really have any strong, like, I don't know that it's necessarily a priority or not, but
I feel
I
like,
just thought it was.
yeah, I guess I don't feel like strongly motivated one way or the other. I think what it's making me think about is unsafe fields. It's totally
I was
different.
thinking the exact same thing.
I'm totally in favor of, but they serve a very different purpose. And I was wondering whether unsafe locals made any sense. That I know that there have been like occasional questions around, well, if you move out of a variable, is the compiler free to reuse that stack space, or does it still hang around? And I don't want to burden too much on OneRFC, but I could imagine extensions in that direction that allow you to declare things as unsafe to signal I'm doing weird stuff with them. But,
I don't know if anyone saw one of those threads in, I think it was Unsafe Code Guidelines on Zulip, about some of the papers of looking at unsafe code in Rust. Because at least one of the survey papers had a thing for, here's the number of functions that are marked unsafe but do not contain unsafe code, and that means that they didn't need to be unsafe, which is incorrect currently.
Nico, I know you touched upon this in the way back in Tootsie Pop days, but it seemed like there was a suggestion that you were making there that our optimizations could potentially change based on whether a particular local was marked as unsafe or not. And unsafe not having like runtime behavior is something that I think I care about.
yeah, that's fair.
I think the other thing with this was kind of a part of the motivation was to have an alternative to the very unsafe cell type, which,
yeah, the racy unsafe cell.
Yeah,
that's right. I remember that now.
to me it seems sort of, I don't know, I think it's just strictly better to like not have a type that is sync for no reason, basically, so just so that you can put it in a static.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see what were the major arguments.
I think on the thread there was basically some question of whether maybe we should just do both. Like we can have this, but then we still have racy unsafe cell because we don't actually like reduce the requirement for sync on unsafe statics. But to me, that seems sort of like the worst of the two worlds.
That's right. I guess there was some objection to unsafe dropping the sync requirement because it's some kind of non-orthogonal, which is true. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion about it. I guess my concern is like, I worry that we might later come up with another sort of what we wanted unsafe to mean, but I'm not sure what else it could mean. I would feel better if it were part of a, maybe if we feel like it fits with what unsafe fields mean in some sense, which.
Yeah, I think because sort of, I think there's an obvious way to like, this could be connected to a larger like attempt to rationalize and unsafe.
Right. That's kind of why I'm a little reluctant, is like piecemeal adding unsafe versus.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Can anyone spitball a thing that unsafe on a field would do other than just make it unsafe to mention?
I can't. but it's a little bit different than what, like this adds, also removes the sync requirement. I don't know.
Yeah.
It also conceptually like makes it sort of unsafe cell like safe. Sorry, that didn't make any sense, but
It makes an unsafe cell safe.
I should say that again. This unsafe is like adding extra behavior, and the idea that it wouldn't add extra behavior elsewhere is surprising.
You mean removing the sync bound?
Right, when used in a field, but I would think you might not want that.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it's just sort of like the same way that unsafe blocks add the ability to dereference raw pointers, right? Like,
Right. I'm just contesting that I feel like that seems like the usage of unsafe here is not the same as the usage of unsafe in fields, and that could potentially be surprising or sort of like unintuitive, right?
but that's only because statics are required to be sync, but fields are not required. Like,
Right, but it's surprising to me that unsafe on a static would have any behavior other than making it unsafe to access if I already know about the unsafe behavior of unsafe on a field. And so then if I went to go make it safe, for example, and then like my code stopped compiling because a sync bound was introduced, that would be surprising, right?
sure, and I think that is sort of the argument against it. But to me, that sounds like it would be surprising in the same way that learning how the language works is surprising, and then you would now know this difference. And
Yeah, surprising isn't necessarily bad. It's just, you know, it's a non-obvious interaction of features.
yeah, I think that's true. But I think it's what the non-obvious thing to me is actually that statics are required to be safe statics, in order for them to be safe to use.
One thing I will mention is that doing some sort of libs review recently, there was sort of this notion of platforms which don't have threads in the first place, where sort of sync on statics and more generally like mutexes and stuff doesn't even, like, you don't need it, you don't want it. And you get these like weird situations where you're, implementing it for a mutex type, because otherwise you can't put that mutex type in a static, even though, the mutex just has a cell inside it. And it feels like there could be a world where on some platforms, like WASM potentially, you would want to sort of say more generally that statics never require the sync bound, whether they're safe or unsafe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I've definitely written code where I've sort of wanted cell to be like the default in some sense.
Yeah,
I know I'm not dealing with threads. I just want the sort of easier behavior.
It's sort of interesting because it's our backwards compatibility story to another a platform's guarantee around whether or not it will ever have like concurrency, right?
I guess, I mean, a binary could Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, I was just saying, Nico and I talked about this ages ago with respect to some async stuff where you wanted like generic modules that are, sort of generic over whether or not you care about thread safety. And I find that I'm often like writing libraries along these lines where it's like, if my end user cares about thread safety, I want to be using mutexes, but otherwise I would prefer to be using cells, for example. And I feel like there's sort of a large.
Yeah, I mean, the whole compiler right now is generic over whether we're parallel or not by swapping out like a single module.
Yeah.
Sort of scary, but works out well in practice.
Yeah. I think of libraries like IM having the IM RC version.
I could definitely imagine a like binary level. I'm just going to be single threaded, but sorry, I've got to drop because hard stop.
Hard stop. Good progress. We're getting there. We're getting close. Now we're getting to the more recent stuff. It's a little juicier. All right.
Bye.
Bye.